So, welcome to a new type of video for this channel. As some of you may know, there is a current sort of up in the air situation with Dark and Darker as to whether or not it will or won't be coming back due to some legal concerns. So, in lieu of that, I've decided to start a new type of content on this channel. This new content will be centered around Dungeons and Dragons. Specifically, this type of video is going to be custom subclasses for Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition. And these subclasses will be custom subclasses that I have homebrewed and made. This series of videos will cover those homebrew subclasses and will outline what they do, as well as give a look at how you would build a character with that subclass. So if you do enjoy this video and want to see more of these types of videos, leave a like and leave a comment below letting me know what you think and if you have any feedback. Now, before you go playing any of these subclasses I'm releasing in your own games, be sure to consult with your DM first if you are a player planning to use this subclass in a game. Not every DM likes homebrew subclasses in their games, or at least doesn't want homebrew that they don't know what it does in their games. So consult with your DM first, and be sure to ask them if it's okay to run this subclass, tell them that it's homebrew, all those sorts of things, just to make sure that they are okay with this being in their game. And if you're a DM watching this video, feel free to show this subclass to your players. If you have a player that's been looking for maybe this type of subclass, you can bring it to your games and let them know. The subclasses I release in these videos will be free to use, and in the description of this video will be a link to D&D Beyond, where you can look at the subclass and add it to your characters in D&D Beyond if you use that, or write it down and print it out if you're using paper in your games. Also, as a note, all of the subclasses I will be using will be compatible with the base rules for D&D 5th edition, so there are no extra spells or things included inside of the actual subclass itself that require extra content, like Xanathar's or Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. The subclass will always be fully compatible with base Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition rules. You should be able to use this subclass with just a player's handbook. So, with all of that prefacing now taken care of, let's begin to dive into this subclass for Dungeons & Dragons that I have homebrewed. This subclass is for Warlock, and it is known as Pact of the Ancient Titan. So, let's begin by reading what the descriptor of the subclass has to say. You have made a pact with a Titan from the Outer Planes. Titans are the largest of true giant races, and ranked highest on the Ordning. Many Titans were capable spellcasters or psionicists. Beings of this type include Lanaxus, Omo, and Ramak. This is just a descriptor of the subclass. I included it just as a little bit of flavor and so you understand where your powers as this Warlock are coming from. As you may know, Warlocks get their powers from a pact with some sort of entity. It does not have to be a god, it can just be a very powerful entity. And in this case, this Warlock is getting their powers from an Ancient Titan from the Outer Planes. So feel free to theme that however you want or change it entirely, it doesn't matter. That is just flavor for the subclass. Now moving on to the first ability you get at first level as part of this subclass. This ability is called Titan Spirit. As a bonus action, you may empower your presence to rival that of a Titan. This form lasts for 1 minute or until used again. While empowered, you gain a bonus to your HP maximum equal to 8 multiplied by your Warlock level. For example, a 5th level Warlock would gain 40 extra to their HP maximum. You also heal for that same amount when activating this ability. Also, while empowered, whenever a hostile creature starts its turn within 60 feet of you, it must make a Wisdom saving throw against your spell save DC. If the creature fails, it perceives you to be the most dangerous creature around, and has disadvantage on attack rolls against anyone other than you. When this empowerment ends, your HP maximum returns to normal. You may use this feature once per short rest. So this first feature you get here is somewhat akin to like a barbarian's rage in how it functions. And this ability will be somewhat of the bread and butter for this entire subclass. Multiple of the subsequent abilities revolve around this Titan Spirit. Let's start by breaking down the Titan Spirit into its first half. So the first half mentions this Titan Spirit form, this empowerment. It lasts for 1 minute, and when you're in this form, your HP maximum increases to 8 multiplied by your Warlock level. Now, this is a near doubling in most cases, Aside from circumstances where you might take feats like tough or have items that increase your HP or your constitution, this 8 multiplied by your warlock level should be a near doubling for most warlocks, assuming you haven't multi-classed. Which, it's fair to point out that this does scale based off warlock levels, so this HP bump that you're getting to your HP maximum is reliant on you being warlock. So multi-classers can't jump in here at first level and just get a giant bump to their character's HP, they need to have warlock levels to get that bump. Now, as far as the ability functions, it's important to note that this is a bump to your HP maximum. This is not temporary hit points. So if you use this ability in conjunction with something like Armor of Agathis, which gives you temporary hit points, this stacks with that. This is not temporary hit points. This is just raising your HP maximum. So to put this in context, let's say you are like it says, a 5th level warlock and you have 40 hit points normally. So if you have 40 hit points normally and you use this ability, your maximum now becomes 80. And also your current hit points, if they were at 40, becomes 80 as well, because like it says, you heal for the same amount when activating the ability. Now, let's say you were at 20 out of 40 hit points and used this ability, then you would be at 60 out of 80 after activating it. Because you're not healing for as much as it takes to get you to your maximum, you're healing for the same amount that your HP maximum is raised. Now, as some of you may have already noticed, this ability is somewhat of a tanking ability, and not somewhat, it is a tanking ability, and that's because this subclass is meant to be a tanking subclass. And it's not meant to be a melee subclass necessarily, specifically just tanking. Warlocks do already have a melee subclass, Hexblade, but this is not meant to force you to play a melee character. All the abilities in here function as tanking abilities, but without forcing you to use melee weapons. And part of the reason I wanted to make a tanking subclass for Warlock is, well, 1, because they don't really have a tanking subclass, but 2, because Warlocks have access to one of the best tanking spells in the game, Armor of Agathis, a spell which not very many, in fact, no other classes have access to at base. So, Armor of Agathis becomes a very, very powerful tool in the belt of this tank. Now, the first half of this ability does scale off of Warlock levels and becomes better and better as you go. However, the second half of this ability is something we call a soft taunt. And if you don't know what I mean by that, a taunt is causing enemies in a game to target you. You are taunting them to attack you rather than attack, say, your allies. And the reason we call it a soft taunt is because you are not forcing them to attack you with this ability. Like the ability says, when they are within 60 feet of you and they start their turn, they have to make a wisdom saving throw, and if they fail, then they have disadvantage on everyone other than you, meaning they are incentivized to attack you should they fail, because they don't have any negatives to their attack rolls against you, they just have disadvantage against everyone else. So this is a very good AoE soft taunt, and it's one of the very few area of effect taunts in the game. And because of that, there is a lot of potential here for multi-classers to jump into this subclass for 1 level just to get this 60-foot taunt, because this does not scale off of Warlock levels like the HP does. You won't ever see anybody jump into this subclass just to grab that HP bump, because it's only going to be an 8 hit point bump if they only take 1 level, but the taunt they can grab immediately. Now, it is important to keep in mind, if you're worried about this becoming a multi-class problem in your games, that there is multi-class requirements in D&D, meaning for Warlock specifically, you have to have at least a 13 charisma to multi-class into a Warlock, or just to play a Warlock in general. So keep that in mind when trying to make sure that people aren't abusing this, that if your Barbarian wants to take 1 level of Warlock for this, they're going to have at least a 13 charisma. So those are the 2 halves of this ability, and we'll get into later how you can use certain spells and abilities that you get as a Warlock to make this more effective. But let's finish by addressing the sentence at the end, which says that when this empowerment ends, your HP maximum returns to normal. Now, what this means is, say you were that 40 out of 40 hit point Warlock, and then you use this ability and now you're at 80 out of 80. Let's say you take 20 damage during the fight, now you're at 60 out of 80, fight ends, this ability ends. Well, when this ability ends, if you're at 60 out of 80, you would drop down to your original HP maximum, which would be 40, so you would be at 40 out of 40. Those other hit points you had have to drop down to meet your new maximum. But it doesn't drop 20 below your maximum just because you were 20 below your maximum before. Your hit points are just being reined in to be within your HP maximum. This means that let's say you took a lot of damage and you went down to 20 out of 80 hit points and then the ability ended, you would be at 20 out of 40 hit points. And finally, we can note that at the end it says you may use this feature once per short rest. This means that you can never use this feature more than once in a fight, at least not in typical rules. If your games have some rule where you have a magic item or a special ability or something that allows you to use short rest abilities more than once, then you would be able to do that. But for most games, you'll never be able to use this feature more than once at a given time. You'll have to short rest or long rest again to get this feature back. However, for those few cases where you might be able to use this more than once at a time, I have written at the beginning of this that the form lasts for 1 minute or until used again, meaning if you use it again while it's up, it would just reset the ability. So if you had 40 out of 40, you went to 80 out of 80, used the ability again, you'd still be at 80 out of 80. It would just reset itself. So that was the first level ability that we get as part of this subclass. Now there are a couple more things you get at first level as part of Warlock subclasses. So for this subclass in particular, you get a bonus spell. Now this bonus spell is Enlarge Reduce. The reason I picked Enlarge Reduce here is mainly just thematic reasons, as you are being given these gifts by an Ancient Titan, so it was only fitting that you'd be able to cast a spell that can enlarge you. This bonus spell is always prepared and doesn't count against the number of spells you know, so it's not costing you anything to have this spell. And as a bonus, you get to cast it once per long rest without expending a spell slot, which is very nice for a class that does not get a lot of spell slots. Also as part of this subclass, like all other Warlock subclasses, you get an expanded spell list, meaning there are some spells that are added to your spell list which are not normally on the Warlock spell list. So I'm going to list all the spells now. We can get into later if any of these spells are particularly useful for this character, but I'm just going to list them. For the Pact of the Titan expanded spell list, at first level we have Bane and Shield. Second level spells are Barkskin and Warding Bond. At third level we have Bestow Curse and Haste. Fourth level spells are Compulsion and Fire Shield. And at fifth level we have Anti-Life Shell and Dominate Person. Alright, so now let's talk about the 6th level ability you get as part of this subclass. This 6th level ability is called Giant's Resilience. You are imbued with the hardiness of Giant Kin. While empowered by your Titan Spirit, your armor class gains an extra +1. This bonus increases to +2 at 10th level and +3 at 14th level. Additionally, when you first gain this feature, you may pick one of the following damages to be permanently resistant to: Cold, Fire, Lightning, or Thunder. So this ability that you get at 6th level scales as you continue throughout your Warlock career, and it synergizes specifically with your Titan Spirit form. So the first half of this ability gives you a plus to your armor class, and this is only specifically while in your Titan Spirit form. And this is just a nice bump to your tanking, as it makes you harder to hit. Now the second half of this ability gives you a damage resistance, and you get to pick from one of these 4. Now something to keep in mind with this damage resistance is that this damage resistance is not just in your Titan Spirit form. This damage resistance is all the time. So while the first half of this ability was mentioning that you get an armor class bump in Titan form, this damage resistance is all the time. Next, at 10th level, we have a new ability called Fuel the Flames. Whenever a creature fails their Wisdom saving throw against your Titan Spirit, you heal for 1d8 hit points. So this ability is a healing ability, and it works in conjunction again with your Titan Spirit form. So this ability is talking specifically about that saving throw that enemies have to make when they start their turn within 60 feet of you while you're empowered by your Titan Spirit. So what this does is, it heals you every time that an enemy fails their taunt, essentially. Meaning that you are going to get extra hit points whenever you successfully taunt an enemy, which is great because more than likely you will get targeted by that enemy and will take a bunch of damage when it's their turn. So being able to get that little extra bump in healing, especially when you have a high pool of health, because remember, these are not temporary hit points you're getting. This is a raising of your HP maximum, meaning that you now have a very large pool of health to pull from and heal into when you take damage. This Fuel the Flames ability is going to work specifically very well against large groups of enemies. If you are trying to tank a single enemy, then this single D8 that you may be getting is not going to do you much good. But against a group of 5 or 6 enemies, if they're all failing, that's 5 or 6 d8s you're getting every round of healing. And this ability might seem fairly strong given how much healing you're getting if you are successfully taunting a lot of enemies. But keep in mind that you don't get this ability until 10th level, and at 10th level, 1 extra d8 to your hit points or even 5 extra d8 to your hit points might not make all that much of a difference if you're the one getting solely attacked. So this Fuel the Flames ability is really meant to be a survivability type thing for a character that's not really intended to tank normally, trying to tank, especially in high level gameplay. Now let's talk about the final ability that you get as part of this subclass at 14th level, and that is Earth Shatter. Once per short rest, you may momentarily increase your mass to that of a giant and stomp the ground. Doing so causes all creatures on the ground within 30 feet of you to make a dexterity saving throw against your spell save DC. Any creatures who fail are knocked prone and take 8d6 bludgeoning damage. Creatures that succeed are not knocked prone and take half damage. So this final ability is somewhat of icing on an already very nice cake. This ability does not do anything necessarily towards your tanking, but it is a very nice ability that acts somewhat as a 3rd level fireball with a prone effect. This ability is just intended to give some more utility to this character, and for a character that doesn't have very many spell slots, getting an ability that acts like a spell can be somewhat useful. Also note that this ability comes back on every short rest, meaning you can use it more than once in a day. Some things to note about the ability specifically are that it affects all creatures, meaning it affects your allies too, and that it only affects things that are on the ground, meaning if you have flying targets that you're trying to stomp, this will not work. So, now that we've covered all of the abilities that you get from the Ancient Titan Warlock, let's take a look at a character I've built. Now this character is a full Warlock, 10th level, and there are no multi-classes, nothing like that. This Warlock does take the Tough feat, and this Warlock also takes Warcaster. The hit points are fixed, and the abilities are standard array. So if we take a look at the character sheet here, you can see that the maximum hit points of this Warlock is 103. Now that is because we have a +3 to our Constitution and we have the Tough feat. So to put this in perspective now, let's take that Titan Spirit ability. Say we activate it. Now our character's max hit points would be 183. So for a 10th level Warlock, that is very high. Now as you'll also notice, our armor class is only a 12. But we do have a +2 to our dexterity, and we have taken the Armor of Shadow's Eldritch Invocation, meaning that we can cast Mage Armor at will without expending a spell slot whenever we want. So if we cast Mage Armor, that puts us at a 15 armor class. And if we activate our Titan Spirit ability, which gives us a +2 to our armor class because of Giant's Resilience at 10th level, we would actually be at a 17 armor class the moment we enter combat. So having a 17 armor class and 183 hit points when combat starts is not too bad for a 10th level Warlock. Not to mention we are taunting all of the enemies within 60 feet of us. Now let's cover all the spells that I think are very useful for this character. So we'll start in the Cantrips section. There are a couple cantrips I want to mention here. The first being Blade Ward. Now the reason I took Blade Ward is because Blade Ward is a cantrip that allows you to have resistance against bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage dealt by weapon attacks, which is one of the most common ways to get hit in D&D. Now this cantrip takes an action to use, and it gives you the resistance for 1 round. But this can be incredibly useful in some scenarios, especially a scenario where you are using your Titan Spirit and you are drawing the aggression from, let's say, 5 or 6 enemies on a battlefield. You know that coming up when it's their turn, they're probably all going to attack you, so it might be a good idea to cast this Blade Ward in preparation for that and have resistance to a lot of that damage. The other cantrip I think is worth mentioning here is Mind Sliver. Now Mind Sliver is a very nice cantrip specifically for tanking against a single target. So if you have like a boss that you're trying to tank against, this could be a great cantrip to have, because what it does is it makes it so that if the boss fails their saving throw against the spell, they now have a negative d4 against their next saving throw. So you can cast this on your turn, and so long as they don't make a saving throw until it's their turn, then they'll have to have a d4 minus to their taunt saving throw. So this cantrip can be useful in very niche circumstances, and I would recommend it because you do fight a lot of bosses in D&D, and this could be a very useful ability depending on your position in the initiative order. Now let's go over some of the spells that I want to talk about. First and foremost, the spell I want to talk about is Armor of Agathis, because of course this spell is unique to Warlock, and this is a very good spell for tanks. When you cast Armor of Agathis, it gives you temporary hit points, and at first level it only gives you 5 temporary hit points, but it gives you 5 more for every level after that. And as a Warlock, we have 2 5th level spell slots as part of our Pact. So if we cast Armor of Agathis at 5th level, that gives us 25 temporary hit points, meaning our 183 hit point Warlock would now be in the 200s for hit points. Also, when enemies damage those temporary hit points, they take 25 points of cold damage, and they keep taking that until those temporary hit points go away. So potentially if you are trying to tank, let's say 5 or 6 mobs that don't hit very hard, you could get hit 5 or 6 times in one round by all those guys, and they all take 25 points of damage if they don't make it through that temporary hit points. Not to mention they're not even scratching this 183 hit point pool that you have that they haven't gotten to yet. So Armor of Agathis is your best friend as a tank here. It's a great spell, and I would highly recommend taking it, and I would also highly recommend you save your Pact spell slots for using Armor of Agathis at 5th level. Now another spell I want to talk about is Bane, and I think we all know why Bane is a good spell here, and that's because it will allow you to target multiple enemies and give them all negative d4s to their saving throws against your taunt. So if you have a large group that you're trying really hard to make hit you, and you're worried they might succeed on their wisdom saving throws, then Bane them all, and they have a negative d4 to those saving throws, which makes them even more likely to fail it. And keep in mind when we're talking about these wisdom saving throws against your taunt that wisdom saves are somewhat of a dump stat for most enemies in D&D. Unless you're fighting some very intellectual enemies like mages or spellcasters really of any sort, most monsters and creatures and beasts in D&D all have very low wisdom scores. So Bane here, on top of the fact that they probably already have a negative modifier, is going to make it very difficult for them to succeed against your spell save. The last spell I want to touch on is Warding Bond. Now, this spell is very niche, but this spell can be very good in the right circumstance. And let me explain. So the spell allows you to tether yourself to another player. When you do this, that person gets a +1 bonus to their armor class, to their saving throws, and they have resistance to all damage. Now the reason they get that resistance to all damage is because you are taking the other half of the damage. Now this is somewhat of forced tanking, right? So if you have a player in your group that you know is going to get targeted by the enemies, and you know that no matter what you do, you're not going to be able to taunt those enemies away from them, then you can use Warding Bond and allow your large hit point pool to soak up at least half of the damage that your teammate would be taking. So this is niche, but you'd be surprised how many times this actually comes up in D&D, right? So let's take, for example, a scenario where perhaps you're going up against a religious cult. And let's say that one of the members of your party was excommunicated from this religious cult, or used to be a part of it and then left. So you're going up against this cult, they know your party member already, and because they recognize your party member, they're most likely going to only attack your party member. Well, now you cast Warding Bond ahead of time, knowing that your party member is going to be the one in danger here. And now you're soaking up damage that you probably wouldn't otherwise be able to soak up, because even with disadvantage on your ally, these enemies probably will still attack him anyway. So Warding Bond is perfect for those scenarios where you know it's just going to be real hard to tank enemies because of some specific member of your group or some NPC you have with you that you just know for sure is going to be the one targeted by their attacks. The only other things I'll cover here is that taking the tough feat could be very nice for this character just for more hit points, but also taking Warcaster is somewhat of a necessity almost for this character, especially if you're going purely Warlock. And that's because Warcaster allows you to have advantage on concentration, which you're going to need because you're probably going to be getting hit a lot being a tank, and being able to concentrate on spells is very important for you as a spellcaster. Also, since you're not really a melee expert and don't really have any expertise in melee weaponry, unless you decide to multi-class or take something else, you won't really have a chance to make opportunity attacks as this character, so being able to use a spell as a reaction instead of a melee attack is very nice. So I would highly recommend Warcaster if you are planning to play just a Warlock for this subclass. So that was a deep dive and an overview of this Homebrew subclass that I've created for Warlock in D&D 5th edition. If you liked this video and want to see more subclasses like this, leave a like and tell me your thoughts in the comments. Also, like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, I will leave a link in the description for the D&D Beyond page of this subclass, so you can add it in D&D Beyond, or so you can print it or copy it down and use it for your character sheet. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.